challenge that title. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Take a deep breath. We're almost done. Let it out. My name is Chelsea Romulo, and I'm an assistant professor at University of Northern Colorado. And I'm going to continue talking about Mauritia flexuosa, but we're going to move to the other side of the Amazon. And we're also going to talk about people a little bit. So, for today's talk, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on Mauritia flexuosa, and I have to thank Linton for both starting on that background and for accidentally selecting the same slide background as me. So then I'm going to give you two observations based on my market research on this species, and then what's happening currently in Peru that is very interesting, and then some next steps for research. I've been told that it is important to get to the point at the beginning of your talk, so here is my point. I'm looking for collaborators in the spirit of Howard Nelson's plenary this morning. So my background is more in ecology and economics, and I would love to meet some social science and communication science folk who are interested in collaborating with me. So Mauritia flexuosa is found throughout the Amazon rainforest, and where I work in Peru, it forms these dense stands, sometimes up to hundreds of hectares in size. So when you look at this photo, it's very different than the savanna or sometimes mangrove ecosystems where you can find Mauritia flexuosa associated. Almost every tree in this image is Mauritia flexuosa. When we look at the distribution of research of this plant, previous work by my colleagues and I show that there's a really big density of research just in Peru. The distribution of the plant is in this hatching area all throughout the Amazon and into Trinidad and Tobago, but what we see is that most of the research is occurring in Peru. I'm curious as to why that is. I have an idea. I did find a Mauritia seedling here in Nariva Swamp, so that was very exciting on a Tuesday of this week. In Peru, the fruit is actually harvested for human consumption. I think that that human factor maybe is why there's such a density of research occurring on that side of the Amazon. You can see in this image that one fruit branch or raceme of this palm is almost the same size as a full-grown man. My colleague here is taller than I am, so you can imagine how much fruit that is. Each one of these trees can produce 3 to 5 of these racemes each year in this region, so it's a lot of fruit. And in addition to feeding some of the local people in Peru, it also feeds a lot of different animal species. So although Mauritia flexuosa is not an endangered species, it may have been extirpated in some areas, but it's not overall endangered. It does feed animals like these red hucaris, which are endangered, or tapir, which are a very exciting animal to see. This guy's eating some off the ground. His name is Muchacho. When you look at the aguaje, it's called aguaje in Peru, the Mauritia flexuosa market, the market is huge. It comes into cities in these sacks, and in the city of Iquitos, which has about 500,000 people, there are hundreds to thousands of these sacks arriving every single day. Most of the fruit that comes into the market of Iquitos is from trees that are cut down. So I showed a picture of someone climbing earlier, but from our research recently in Peru, what we found is that if you compare climbing versus cutting, about 92% of those bags that are coming in are coming from trees that are cut down. In the spirit of the opening ceremony with Gerardo Ceballos, talking about creativity and thinking about conservation in new ways, I'm not actually going to talk about cutting and climbing in today's lecture. I'm going to talk instead a little bit about the market system and what's driving people's decisions and how they harvest and what they harvest and when they harvest. So here's a map of the northern Peruvian Amazon where I do my research. Ecuador is to the northwest, Colombia to the northeast, and then Brazil to the east. Iquitos is about here at the confluence of several different rivers, Napo coming from the north, I guess this way from your angle, and the Ucayali and the Marañón coming up from the south. And this is actually the place where the Amazon River begins to be called the Amazon River. If we take this map and plot out all of the communities that we know harvest Mauritia flexuosa, it looks like this. There's hundreds of communities, some as small as 15 or 20 people, some that have hundreds of people in their community, all harvesting to bring fruit to the city of Iquitos. It's very, very popular there. If we add another layer of information to this map, that would be these yellow dots here. You can see that, these yellow dots represent 90% of the overall aguaje market. So 90% of all sacks come from less than 10% of the communities. And so not every community is harvesting the same amount or even the same amount per person. And here's a box of where those communities are located. And you can see that they are at a little bit of a distance from Iquitos. And I've drawn a little question mark here because I was curious why the communities where the bulk of the harvest is occurring are farther away from the city. This is going to be my first observation. There are a few things that can explain that distribution. One is the presence of Mauritia flexuosa swamps. And so maybe these communities are just closer to more Mauritia flexuosa. Maybe because people cut it down, they've extirpated the species closer to the city. Also, when you are closer to cities, usually there's a lot more opportunities for other job prospects. But what I want to mention here is something interesting that I learned about happily from another person doing their dissertation at the exact same time in the exact same place as I was. This is Salone. She was a student at Virginia Tech. And she was actually studying transportation systems. And in Peru, most of the fruit coming into the market are loaded up onto these large barges. They function as big transport trucks on the rivers. And what happens is as the big transport ship comes up the river, and materials and fruit and forest products are loaded, it fills up. And at a certain point along the river, the boat is full and it cannot take on anything else, and anybody else further up the river can't get their materials or their goods onto the boat. And so there's actually this really interesting barrier to access of the market closer to the city because the boats are moving in one direction. If you draw this line on my map, you can see that it makes a very nice barrier between the yellow dot communities where the bulk of the harvest is occurring and the rest of the communities. So this is an interesting factor in how the harvest of the species is distributed. And when I talked to folk in these communities for my dissertation, I did have people tell me that they were concerned about being able to get their material onto the boat because Mauritia flexuosa fruit does rot very quickly in a matter of days. So it's not necessarily as lucrative as things like bananas or dried fish that have a longer shelf life so that you can wait for a second or a third boat if the boat is full. Just to give you an idea of the scale, I'm sitting here next to quite a few sacks of fruit waiting for a boat. And if the boat does not show up, this day the boat did show up, so that's good, these sacks of fruit end up being thrown in the river. So there's quite a bit of waste occurring in this system just from access to the market or lack of access to the market. The other observation that I want to share with you are price fluctuations. Luckily, another lady did a dissertation in the same region looking at the market for Mauritia flexuosa in 1988, kind of using that as a baseline. And what she found is that there was quite a lot of fluctuation in the price of the fruit. So this graph is just showing price. We did some similar analysis looking at price of the fruit over time. These are by months. This is for 2011 and 2012. If you add her data on top of it normalized to 2012 dollars, you'll see that the fluctuation is a little bit more stable than it was in the past, but you still have quite a bit of fluctuation. A lot of this fluctuation is due to differing amounts of sacks coming into the city. On some days there would be as few as 500 sacks coming in. On other days there would be as many as 2,000. So quite a range of sacks coming in. And because it does rot quickly, you have to sell it quickly. And so on days when there were very few sacks, then the price would go up because there was a high demand. On days when there were very many sacks, then the price would go down because there's too much, more than the demand needs, and so you have all this fluctuation. While I was, sorry, let me restate that. when you have both this transportation inconsistency and price fluctuations without a lot of information being transferred around the system, you get a lot of waste. And what I'm interested in this situation is how the communication network of the market can function both to create inconsistencies and price fluctuations, or maybe how a communication network could help address these situations. When I talk about communication networks, one way that people can communicate is via cell phones. And as I was collecting my dissertation data, there were no cell phone towers in the Amazon. And at some point during my data collection, they started being built and they've just gone online. And so I imagine that the system is about to change very drastically. And there's a similar study done in India on fishing communities. Then what these researchers did is they followed cell phone activity as cell phone towers were being built. And what they found is that as these fishermen in this area obtained cell phones, they started having consistent and instant price information. Oh, I messed up my arrows. And then there was reduced price variation, so they didn't have all that variation across markets. And that resulted in less waste and hopefully increased profits and welfare for the people. This was a sociology study. The idea here being, though, that less waste means fewer cut trees, right? This was for fisheries, but I'm extrapolating for Mauritia flexuosa. However, there's a potential problem because people are risk adverse. And communities would tell me, oh, I don't cut down this tree or I don't harvest this tree because I might not be able to get it to the market, or I don't know what price I'll get when I get to the market. If we resolve those issues, potentially people will want to harvest it more because then they will have better information. They'll know, okay, I can get a good price, I can get it to the market. So one of these things might happen. My next steps are to write a grant proposal to do this studies. I can use my dissertation research as a baseline for what's happening in the market right now. Additionally, there's a company, GSMA, which is a European cell phone collaboration, and they actually have been really intentional about closing this information access gap in Latin America. So they're specifically going into places and selecting where they're putting in cell phone towers. So we can follow where this is going to occur and then look at how might this change how people communicate and access the forest. I think that this would be a really good project for the Couple of Natural and Human Systems NSF grant program, so that's kind of what I'm aiming at if people are interested in talking to me more about this potential collaboration. And I'd like to thank my advisors and funders, and then especially my amazing field technicians in Peru. Thank you all for your time.